Every company wants to become a platform company, and most of them are failing, except for all the digital native companies. They know how to get it into a platform, right? One of a very powerful statement Amit made, and I'm going to use it for sure when I go to my customers, is they don't know how to expose their capabilities as a platform, right? How do I expose the capabilities I've built over many, many years, right? Everybody want to quickly get into what Google and Facebook does, but they have insane amount, and I've seen this with customers like Agilent. I was in Japan a few weeks back with a customer called Shimadzu, exactly the same problem, right? They have wonderful chromatographic test equipments. They want to become a platform company, but they don't know, right? They have to incubate their capabilities, what they have built over many years. How do I expose it? Sorry. That's the power of this platform to be successful in the marketplace. And one of the key things which I'm going to talk about is what it really enables on this one, right? Microservices. One of the conversations which we have, there are two conversations when Accenture gets into the C-suite of people when we talk, right? One is platform for real? Don't compare us with Googles and the Facebooks of the world, right? We are a different set of companies, right? Is there a business rationale for moving into platform, right? So that's the first question, and we have been answering this question for the last 1.5 years, and we keep learning, right? The second question is, okay, let's move into this platform. What is the business case for moving into microservices, right? On a developer world, there's always this developer's egos. There's people who say, hey, building a big software product is much easier. Let's go and do it. And there are a set of people who say, hey, microservices is better. We should do that, right? That's one part of this conversation. But the big part of the conversation for us when we get into the C-suite is, do I really need to move into microservices at all? Is this the only way of realizing a platform, right? So the next 20 minutes, I'm trying to cover what we really think is the business case for microservices. And this is the first thing, and I have only 2-3 slides, right? So this is the most powerful thing, and this is something which we have built, right? I'm looking, most of them are Asians, most of them understand cricket, but it's for people who don't. It's like a religion for people coming from India, right? So this is the stuff which we saw, and this is real data. This is the India-Australia match that happened 13th of March. The finals, this is the 5th ODI finals, right? It's a very powerful match that was happening. India, Australia is like, a big, two big player countries, very, very powerful in cricket. This is the kind of spikes we saw, right? And this is, and I can give you the data, how we got this data and why it's so important for us, right? So we start, this is like, happening in India. The host country is India. Obviously, there's like, a lot of viewership from India, right? Look at the viewer rates. The way the match was going was, initially there was a peak viewer, say around 2 million. Actually, India was losing at some point, so the viewership dropped significantly. Then around like, I think the 28th over or 15th over, there was a big partnership that got formed. So again, the viewership came in, right? And again, at the end of the last 2 overs, India was almost losing, so the viewership dropped, right? So now, what is the message here is the viewership, there was a spike, there was a valley, right? This is like, the data we get from Hotstar. Hotstar is powered by one of our products, Accenture Video Solutions. So this is the product which powers the Hotstar platform. Hotstar, for people who don't know, is like equivalent of a Netflix in the India market, right? So this is powered by Accenture Video Solutions. So when we build this product, initially we have built it like a monolith product for many, many years. It was running it, right? So as things changed, when companies like Hotstar, Netflix had come in, Accenture Video Solutions now is completely realized as a microservices architecture, right? The powerful reason, and if you look at the red line there, if I didn't do it in microservices architecture, what is going to happen is I would have provisioned the required infrastructure for the peak all the time. So that's what would have happened, right? Hotstar would have invested millions of dollars of infrastructure because they don't know when this whole thing is going to happen, when there's going to be a spike in the viewer rate, when there is going to be a valley in the viewer rate, right? So what we did is this is getting realized on a microservices architecture. 3 points if you look at it. Number one, the spike which I talked about, the real-time ads that come in, which is very, very powerful, right? And it gets ingested at the right amount of time. The third part is, these ads come on an omni-channel platform, right? You're going to see it in a mobile, you're going to see it on a television, you're going to see in multiple devices. All these 3 things were enabled very quickly because we were moving into an microservices architecture, number one, right? The most powerful thing, and I will touch upon these things as I go into the next slide, the most powerful thing is the auto-scaling of the infrastructure And we really feel, right, and this is the biggest business case when we go and talk to our customers. The biggest business case is if you want to scale up and scale down, this is the most important thing you guys need to realize, right? So that's the power of this auto scaling which has come in. Now, this is the business case, and I'm going to go through each one of them. Some of the points which Amit already mentioned, I'm going to leverage on it. Number one is, built for business agility. So, right, why would I want to move into microservices? 2 points for us, and I'll give you examples when we get into some of our customers, who we have been having this conversation. Number one is microservices. Most of the microservices, if you look at it, is completely driven on open source frameworks. This is very important, right? Because the open source frameworks are there. Is there enterprise grade? There are enough of companies in the market which supports enterprise grade open source frameworks for microservices, right? So that's very, very big part of your decision. Hey, do I need to move into microservices architecture at all? So that's number one. Number two, Pari mentioned this one, DevOps, right? Continuous integration and continuous deployment. And this was something, which we did with one of the digital native companies. Most of the digital native companies are getting into devices market. This company is getting into, thermostats, and we were working with them. When they moved into the devices market, realizing a continuous integration on a continuous deployment on a devices market is fairly complex compared to a software business. They were able to do it because most of the pieces of the software, we realized it as a microservices architecture. So that's the second point, right? The third one is the development agility. This is very important, right? And this is something relates to what Pari talked about as talent, right? Development agility. Look at this. All of us understand agile. Everybody is moving into agile development. I don't think that's the point of development agility we are talking about, right? Imagine 100 of your software engineers coming and building something together on a monolith product, right? And we are asking them to provide a lot of agility. It's not going to happen. Imagine if you have 100 people and give them the liberty and say that, okay, each of you, 10 of you will run it like a startup, right? Each one of you will have your choice of technology. Each one of you will build on a stack which you really think you are interested in. This is going to address one of the key points of Pari, because talent is so scarce now. Now, there would be people who are very interested in learning Python. Python is very good for data science, right? There are people who want to do it in Golang. Now, I give the flexibility to all these people to go and do it like a startup, right? That's the third most powerful thing of doing it in microservices. If I do it in monolith, this development agility is never going to come. Then there's that's my second point on unleashing the innovation with flexibility. There's the fourth point, which is again, very powerful, is the product agility. The number of new products, the customers are going to introduce in a platform is far higher than what they would have realized in a normal waterfall model of a product introduction. And how this innovation is going to be enabled with microservices, there's a case with an accommodation provider, one of the biggest accommodation providers. They have, this is something very surprising for us, right? We typically think companies in Bay Area very quickly know how to build platform, they will get their architecture right, they will move into microservices. Not at all true. Number one, when they start, and pre-IPO companies, if you go look at it, they very, very quickly build a fail-fast approach. And for me, doing a fail-fast approach, building it in a monolith product is the right approach as well, right? So they quickly do it, right? It's not going to be, you're not going to get 10 set of people and say that, okay, build your own stack. It's not going to happen. But when they migrate into microservices, right, and this was the case for this accommodation provider, they want to get into the local markets, they want to get into the India market. The product, the payment product, is a complete monolith product they have built. Now, they have to handle an Aadhaar Pay in India, a Rupee Pay in India. Imagine the amount of changes they need to do in their code base of 8 million lines of code, recompile, get it done in a new geography. So we moved them into a microservices architecture, right? Each one of them we are trying to move, we are in the process. Now, to get into a China market, it is like a 3 weeks time period for them to get a new microservices up and running and then getting it done, right? It would have taken them 6 months to completely do this process if they have to enter into a local market. So that's the kind of innovation with flexibility which is going to happen when you're getting into microservices. The third point I'm talking about is the elastic infrastructure. This is the biggest part of, for me, Amit talked about that compute side, and this is exactly how we look at it, right? Compute is given. compute is like, so there's an AWS, there is a, Azure. We are not going to even talk about it, right? There's an application architecture. But eventually, my application architecture need to know how to scale up and scale down this infrastructure, right? Auto scaling has to happen. And that is, whether you take an Amazon Prime Day, whether you take a Walmart, whatever day they have, this all happens because there is an auto-scaling possibility, and it happens at the application level as well. And that gets enabled because of, if you really move into a pure microservice architecture. That is the third thing. The fourth thing, now we are getting into a modular model. The way we look at it is, on a microservices, this is the pizza box model. Probably most of you would have known, most of you have been aware of this. Amazon got this introduced, right? When you create a microservices team, you're not going to have like a 20 people sitting in a microservices, right? The 2 pizza box model was what they suggested, 8 to 10 people. And that makes changes very, very less expensive, because now I have a very, very modular structure for my microservices, right? If I have to localize a problem, it becomes far easier if I'm moving into microservices. And that relates to my last point, how do I improve my fault isolation and resolution? Far easier, and I'm not saying that this is the panacea for all problems we have. There are challenges in getting into a microservices architecture, but fault isolation is getting far easier if you're running into microservices, and the number of open source tools that has come in the market to provide this kind of isolation is phenomenally good, right? So that way, I really think this is the 5 major things where we think there is a business case. And the 6th one, again, I'm taking a lot of inputs from what Amit talked about, is building this ecosystem. What you would have thought is your competition. One of the things, and I can mention the name of this customer, Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser Permanente and Palo Alto Medical Foundation work together today, right? Very closely. How does this happen, right? Kaiser Permanente is one of the costliest equipment, is their MRI scan equipments. And they found the utilization of these equipments is extremely low. For example, if they move the intelligence out of this and realize it as a platform, expose this ecosystem, APIs into a Palo Alto Medical Foundation, I get into Palo Alto Medical Foundation hospital, I find that, hey, the MRI equipment is completely utilized. The Palo Alto can direct the patient into Kaiser Permanente, right? Now, what used to be the competition between these 2 people, now there is an ecosystem of partnership that has happened. And this, again, for us, if you are getting into an ecosystem like this, microservices is an easy enabler, right? If I know what data I can expose, if it's a monolith product, the biggest problem for us is one of the things, there is many conversations when we are getting in, one of the guys who used to come and ask us, hey, you have to move to microservices to get into an API-driven economy? No. Monoliths are extremely good in providing an API interfaces. But if you want to selectively expose data, and you want to selectively give it to partners, microservices is a far better architecture than moving into a monolith, right? So that's the quick case for why we think business case for microservices is getting stronger and stronger. Again, it's not a cure for everything for us. If you are a startup, you want to get into a fail-fast approach, we would still suggest build it like a monolith product, right? Have the hooks right so that when you're getting into scaling, get it into a microservices architecture, right? But if you're in a monolith product trying to get into a platform economy, one of the things you should seriously look at it is how do I reverse engineer my product into a microservices architecture? So this is not something I'm not going to get into details, but I thought I should give this technical part of what happens on a microservices, right? These are the 6 layers. One is the evolutionary design, and this is something which we see. There are a lot of firms which has built this software products, right? Now they are trying to say that I want to move into microservices. What are the things you need to really talk about, right? Your monolith moving into microservices is not going to happen overnight. The way we tend to isolate this one is where there is no dependency on data, a minimum dependency is on data. That you need to move it into microservices as a phase 1, right? The ones which you want to, the core logic which you still want to implement in monolith, you should still have it in monolith for a period of time. And how do I have the glues connecting the microservices and the monolith, right? So that's going to be important, right? That's the evolutionary design. The second one is when you're doing the microservices, bringing in the right business logic, right? So when I design a microservice, the most important part for us is, hey, what is the business logic each microservices will handle, right? It could be one is, payment is becoming big in any of the market, whether it's Apple introducing Apple Pay, the credit cards last week. The payment is for us a business logic, and that needs to be implemented as a microservices, right? Logs is a business logic. It has to be implemented as a microservices. How do I split this one? That's important for us, right? The decentralized governance. This is again, for us, all this microservices team operate on their own full stack. The governance is going to be completely decentralized. We don't need to go manage a single program manager managing a monolith product. So that's the fourth one, and this is again super important when we get into this microservices architecture, is the infrastructure automation, right? One of the things microservices clearly enables is DevOps. Right? If I get into the world of a DevOps SRE model, I really think microservices is a very, very key enabler for getting into this stuff. Imagine the amount of time I would deploy, whether it's an Uber, whether it's an Airbnb, whether it's a Lyft, how many times they deploy a new workload, right? A new release is going to be happening every 8 hours, every 24 hours, right? And you don't need to change the complete piece of architecture if you're going to do a continuous deployment. The only way this could happen, and this is very powerful for us because I really think if you are going to have a continuous integration model in your system and you're going to have continuously deploying your software, microservices is the enabler. I think there's no arguments on this particular point, while we will have arguments on many other points. But if you want to enable a continuous deployment, have a proper site reliability established for your software, we would think that microservices is the right way to get into. Decentralized data management. This is the most powerful thing. One of the things which microservices is not something a new concept, right? Back in 2000s we had this Soha architecture. Very similar, but in Soha architecture, you have an ESB, enterprise bus, which gives all the intelligence and the messaging. But the most important thing is Soha is still a big piece of chunk, number one, and the data by itself is very, very localized there, right? Here, it's shared there. In microservices, each module will have its own database, right? You can play with it as if it is like an individual entity, right? So that's the decentralized data management. And the last one I already touched upon is on the APIs part, which again, for us, API exposure would be easier if you are moving into microservices, but that is not a big constraint, right? A monolith product could expose APIs as good as a microservices, right? But when you're building an ecosystem, when you want to selectively expose intelligence, then your smartened APIs could again get enabled through microservices. The last one, so this is all the good news about microservices. Yes, this is important. I think there is a business case for microservices. There is a technology enablers for microservices. If you're going to adapt it, it's not going to be very difficult, right? The biggest thing which we are seeing in this one, and I think Pari talked about it, I think there are some sessions today. I think I saw Anita heading that session on talent, right? Skill set is completely scarce, right? It's a big blocker for anybody moving into this architecture. And we are undermining this stuff, and it's very nice that Pari made this one saying that talent is a big problem here, and we see this day in and day out, right? If I want to move into microservices, one, there is a cultural problem, and this is something which we were talking with an testing company, educational testing company. They were the firm that administers SAT, ACT test, right? They wanted to move into a real platform architecture. The first problem for them, they were very convinced. The VP engineering is super convinced that, hey, we should get into this stuff. The first problem, after getting into all this stuff, the initial discussion within the team was, nobody wants to expose the data, right? They all are worried if I get into a platform model, I'm supposed to give away my ownership on the code, I will start exposing a lot of data into this stuff, right? Culturally, it's a big problem. That's number one. Number two is the skill set, which I'm talking about. Today, I keep joking that if I have 50 people in Kubernetes, right, I can start my own company, sell it off to Accenture within a week, right? That's the kind of talent which we are not able to get in the marketplace at all, right? Container orchestration, container management, that's a big problem, right? That's one. Second for us is, on microservices, debugging is a problem. I'm not saying localization has helped us, to find out where the problem is, but you get insane amount of logs, telemetry, and getting differentiating between intelligence and what is not intelligence is a problem. Second one is microservices quickly die, right? When there is a problem to diagnose, it takes much more time than compared to how we will diagnose a problem in a monolith, right? So there is a problem there. Security, again, Pari mentioned about it. Security, all the tools and frameworks are here, right? But when you're building a monolith product, it is very, very easy to get into all this security. There's going to be a single governance. Here, microservices is done by each individual team's security framework, and having DevSecOps embedded into your system is going to be very, very essential, right? So that's the fourth point. DevOps and SRE, I talked about. This is a serious enabler. Who builds it is the one who runs it, right? That's the microservices world, right? Somebody, I would say that, my function I've done in a monolith product, somebody integrated it, somebody tested it, somebody deployed it. Doesn't happen in a microservices world, right? Who builds, runs it. Now, that means, the guy who builds it should know how to have the SRE model set, how the ops model is set, how to really integrate the DevOps into the system, right? And the CI/CD pipeline, which is very, very critical for implementing microservices. So that's the one. And the last one is, this is something, there are multiple examples. Redesigning your monolith product into microservices is an art, right? Everybody wants to quickly get it done. It doesn't happen. We need to really get into this stuff, saying that which is really, some of them needs to be continue to be in monolith. What needs to continue in monolith? What are the glues you need to do it, right? There is a business case for moving into microservices, pieces of it, right? For us, when we went into this accommodation company, we very clearly pointed out to them, right? Don't get all your core logic out, right? If you want localization, that's the part which needs to move into microservices. Part of your payments needs to move into microservices, right? So we don't want to get into this world of saying that, hey, overnight, within 3 months, you can re-architect your product from a monolith to microservices, right? That's not going to happen. It's a long journey. But the pieces, whichever we want to move, if we know how to choose it and how to have the glue logic coming back to the monolith product, I think that's the right way of moving the products, right? So these are the 6 pitfalls we think we need to avoid when we are moving from a monolith to microservices architecture. So, and the last thing for me, right, we have been talking with many business stakeholders. One of the things is, if you are, as a leader, you are given the charter of moving a product into a microservices, of realizing a platform into a microservices, I really think, the journey is going to be rewarding, provided your people embrace it. Culture and the skills is the single biggest gap which we see in the marketplace to realize a product as a platform.